The community was in turmoil, a sense of unrest lingering in the air. Jason Reed, once a respected officer in the police force, stood at the crossroads of his career. He had wronged too many, and the weight of his actions bore down on him with an intensity he could no longer ignore. But redemption, real redemption, was something Jason knew he had to fight for. He stood before a crowd that was no longer willing to accept his excuses. Their faces were a mix of anger, frustration, and, strangely enough, hope. Hope that through his actions, maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to make things right. Daniel Cross, the leader of the reform movement, was the first to speak. His voice was steady, unwavering, as he addressed the crowd with a calm authority that contrasted sharply with the emotional turmoil in the room. "True change doesn't come from revenge," Daniel said, his gaze never leaving Jason's. "It comes from holding people accountable. It comes from giving them a chance to show us they can do better." Jason shifted uneasily under the weight of Daniel's words. It was the first time anyone had spoken to him like this, without hatred, without judgment, but with a kind of cautious hope. A hope that Jason was desperate to prove he deserved. "I understand," Jason finally said, his voice quiet but firm. He didn't try to explain or justify himself. He knew words alone could never undo the harm he had caused. But this moment, this was the beginning of something he never thought possible. The beginning of his redemption. A moment of silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of the decision that lay ahead. Then, slowly, one voice from the back of the room broke the stillness. "If Mr. Cross believes we should give him a chance, then I do too," came the voice, strong and resolute. It was a resident, someone Jason had wronged in the past, someone who had every reason to resent him. Yet here they were offering him a chance. That moment, that simple act of trust sparked something in the room. One by one, others began to speak, voicing their support. For the first time in years, Jason could feel a flicker of hope ignite in his chest. The community was willing to give him a chance to prove himself, but he knew it would take more than words. It would take actions that spoke louder than any apology. In the days that followed, Jason took the first steps toward redemption. He showed up at the community center, not as a police officer, but as a member of the community. The place where his mistakes had hurt so many, he now found himself working to repair the damage. He cleaned up the broken windows, mended the walls, and helped with the projects he had once ignored. But more importantly, he listened. He listened to the stories of the residents, of their struggles, their pain, and their hopes for a better future. Jason knew it wouldn't be easy, and that the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles. But the truth was undeniable. Change was possible, and he was determined to prove that even someone as broken as he was could find a path toward healing. Meanwhile, the movement Daniel had started grew stronger, evolving beyond the initial goal of exposing the truth. It had become a symbol of transformation, not just for Jason, but for the entire community. Maggie Brooks, the journalist who had been documenting their journey from the beginning, continued to write about the movement, focusing on the larger picture. That justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about creating opportunities for redemption. And in the midst of it all, Jason realized that the community he had once served in a different capacity had now become the place that would help him rebuild his life. With every small step forward, he felt himself moving away from the past that haunted him. But even as he worked to prove himself, he knew the consequences of his actions still loomed large. The judgment, the internal investigation, and the ever-present pressure from his colleagues weighed heavily on him. Still, Jason kept moving forward. He knew the truth couldn't be erased, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way to make up for it. Jason Reed had taken his first steps toward redemption, but the past wasn't willing to let go so easily. The weight of public pressure, an internal investigation, and the judgmental stares of his colleagues left him in a state of constant tension. He had convinced the community to give him a chance, but within the force, he was a man walking on thin ice. Deep down, Jason knew he had to face the truth, but fear clawed at him. The fear of losing everything. It was this fear that pushed him to make a reckless decision. One evening, as the community gathered for an important meeting at the center, the air was thick with anticipation. This meeting wasn't just about Jason. It was about the future of the reform movement. Daniel Cross led the discussion, addressing a packed room of residents and even local government representatives, including Mayor Helen Moore, who had pledged to support necessary changes. Then, the room fell silent as the door creaked open. Jason walked in, but something was different. He wasn't dressed as a man seeking redemption. He was in uniform. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his stance stiff with authority. The atmosphere turned heavy. Unease spread through the crowd like wildfire. Daniel's sharp eyes locked onto Jason's, his body tense but steady. Jason's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Daniel Cross, you are under arrest for inciting illegal protests and disturbing public order. I have a warrant for your arrest." Gasps filled the room. Murmurs of shock and outrage rippled through the crowd. Some stood in protest, others frozen in disbelief. But Daniel? He didn't flinch. He stood tall, his expression unwavering. "Do you think this will stop us, Jason?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "We're not afraid of you anymore." Jason's jaw tightened, but before he could take further action, another voice rang out from the back of the room. "Stop it, Jason. This ends here and now." All eyes turned toward Mike Turner, Jason's longtime colleague. He stepped forward, dressed in plain clothes, his face unreadable, but his tone absolute. Jason's grip on his warrant tightened. "Mike, stay out of this. This isn't your fight." But Mike wasn't backing down. He took another step forward, looking Jason directly in the eye. "No, Jason. This is about all of us. I've watched you abuse your power, harass these people, and even sabotage this community center. I know about the video, and I know you tried to erase it, but the truth is out now. It's time you face the consequences." A heavy silence settled in the room, suffocating in its intensity. Mayor Helen Moore stood, her face a mixture of determination and disappointment. "Officer Turner, do you have evidence to support your claims?" she asked. Mike nodded. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and handed it to her. "This contains the recovered footage and statements from residents. It proves everything." Jason took a step back. For the first time, his confidence wavered. His mind raced, searching for an escape, but there was none. "This is all a misunderstanding," he stammered. "I was just doing what was necessary to maintain order." But no one believed him anymore. Helen held the USB drive tightly, her voice cold and final. "Officer Reed, these allegations are too serious to ignore. You are hereby suspended pending a full investigation." Jason stood frozen, his world crumbling around him. He looked at the faces in the room, people who had once feared him, now staring at him with nothing but disappointment. His hands, which once carried authority, now hung limply at his sides. Finally, he lowered his head. There was nothing left to say. As Jason was escorted out of the meeting, the room erupted into applause, not out of malice, but as a celebration of justice being served. Daniel turned back to the crowd, his voice strong, filled with pride. "This isn't my victory, it's ours. And this is only the beginning of real change." Sophia, standing beside Daniel, her eyes shining with triumph, smiled. "You did it, Mr. Cross. But more importantly, we all did it." Daniel nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. The journey had been long, the fight brutal, but one thing was clear. This community was no longer afraid. And Jason Reed? His reckoning had only just begun. The fallout from Jason Reed's suspension sent shockwaves through the city. Media outlets flooded the airwaves with reports of his misconduct. The police department, under mounting pressure, was forced to launch a comprehensive investigation, not just into Jason, but into the entire system that had shielded him for so long. Without his badge to protect him, Jason was left vulnerable to the truth. At first, he tried to justify his actions, but the evidence was undeniable. His past offenses, cases that had been quietly dismissed, complaints that had been buried, were all coming to light. His journey toward redemption was going to be long and unforgiving. Meanwhile, the community center finally began to breathe again. The tension that had gripped the neighborhood for months started to fade. Daniel Cross, though still carrying the weight of everything that had happened, could finally feel a sense of relief. Standing outside the center one morning, he watched as people smiled again, something that had felt impossible just weeks ago. The center was no longer just a refuge. It was a symbol of resistance and hope. Sophia, who had once been an angry outsider, had now become an indispensable part of the movement. She led community activities, organized youth programs, and ensured that no one felt powerless again. One evening, as the sun cast golden hues over the neighborhood, Daniel gathered everyone for a meeting. Not one of protest, but of progress. Standing in front of the crowd, he took a deep breath before speaking. Justice is not just about punishment. It's about creating opportunities for redemption and restoring trust. The words hung in the air, powerful and undeniable. The community had learned a painful truth, that one bad officer was never the real problem. The system that protected corruption, that silenced victims, that was the real fight. But this time, they weren't fighting alone. Mayor Helen Moore had been forced to act. She announced a series of police reforms, including better oversight, accountability measures, and direct community involvement in decision-making. This wasn't just about Jason Reed anymore. This was about ensuring that another Jason Reed never rose to power again. Weeks passed, and Jason Reed found himself standing alone. No badge, no authority, just a man drowning in regret. But instead of leaving the neighborhood in disgrace, he chose to stay. At first, people wanted nothing to do with him. He was met with cold stares, hushed whispers, and lingering resentment. But Jason didn't run. Instead, he showed up, not as an officer, but as a man trying to understand the damage he had done. He attended community meetings, not to command, but to listen. He volunteered at the community center, not to control, but to repair. He cleaned the very streets he had once patrolled with hostility. He heard the stories of the people he had hurt. One day, he approached Daniel, his expression stripped of arrogance, his voice quieter than before. "Daniel, I know an apology won't erase what I've done, but I want to thank you for not giving up on me." Daniel studied Jason for a long moment before replying. "I didn't give up on you, Jason, because I believe everyone deserves a second chance. But the road is yours to take, and I hope you'll see it through." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. That would take time, but it was a start. As months passed, the neighborhood transformed. Community meetings became more frequent, but not just to fight injustice. Now, they gathered to build, to heal, to grow. The community center evolved beyond what it once was. It became a model for change, inspiring similar efforts in other neighborhoods. People who had once felt powerless now held leadership roles. Liam Carter, the single father Jason had once harassed, became one of the key organizers of the center's events. He and his daughter, Emily, found a new home in the community, one filled with hope instead of fear. Mary Sullivan, the elderly woman who had spent years feeling invisible, now ran storytelling sessions at the center, sharing wisdom and laughter with young and old alike. Jake Morales, the young tech expert who had first arrived to fix a broken system, found himself teaching free tech workshops for teens, empowering them to create their own futures. One peaceful afternoon, Daniel sat outside the center, watching the community thrive. Sophia joined him, settling into the seat beside him. "Mr. Cross, do you think everything we did really made a difference?" she asked. Daniel smiled, his expression serene. "The meaning doesn't come from what we achieved, Sophia. It comes from how we achieved it together. And I think we've done something truly remarkable." This story wasn't just about one man's redemption. It was about the power of unity, about a community that refused to be silenced, about the truth that real change doesn't come from one victory, but from the people who never stop fighting. What do you think of Jason Reed's decision to seek redemption? Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to like this video, share it to spread the message. Subscribe for more powerful stories that demand change. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.